And we've got our patron individual. Welcome, guys.
Hello,
We've got Greg
hello.
Harris and Simon Jones in. Nice to have you guys back again.
Yeah, shame shame we couldn't bring some decent weather with us, but there you go.
Not your fault.
Yeah,
I
well.
don't blame everything on you, Greg. Just
Yeah,
a few
no.
things.
Most
Yeah?
things.
I have to say that from our last show and from the past couple of shows that we've had together, I've personally taken some action. I've put stuff in my private pension and state pension. So thank you for all your tips. I think
Good.
it's been very good.
Good, glad we could be of some kind of help.
We talk a lot about retirement last month in November, but that was pre-retirement planning. And this time we're talking about post-retirement planning. And I'm thinking, like, do we ever stop planning? Why do we need to talk about post-retirement? I thought post-retirement planning was no planning.
Well, it's a really good question and it's one that we get quite a lot, isn't it? In short answer, you always got a plan for these things, and continued planning is the best way to do it. But there are ways, if you don't want to have particularly much administration in retirement, there are ways in which you can go down where you don't have to make plans. And we'll talk about some of them a bit later on about, safe, secure and guaranteed ways to retire, which, from an ongoing administration point of view, little to none really. But then actually, if you want to get a bit more complex with planning, which can have its natural advantages, then actually, yeah, in answer to your question, unfortunately, it's for life really.
Exactly. So all the good planners in life, they have good lives because they like to plan. What is a safe way to retire?
I think so. It kind of broadly boils down to two main sources of secure income in retirement. Traditionally, pensions came in the format of a guaranteed secured income. There's the trouble with our industry is there's so many terms and jargon, but typically something like a defined benefit or final salary pension is what a lot of maybe the previous generation will be enjoying now, where essentially you're given a promise of a certain income each year until you are no longer in need of it. And then some of them factor in things like spousal benefits where, if you do have a spouse, then they can benefit if you predecease them. The other alternative, which I kind of describe, so it's something called an annuity, which is a bit of a, again, going into technical jargon. But the best way I can describe it is kind of like a reverse mortgage. So if you think about a mortgage, when you purchase a property, you go to a bank or a building society and say, I want to borrow £200,000 and I promise that I will pay it back at £850 a month. The way that an annuity is the reversal of that is because when you come to retirement, you have a big, a varying size pot of money. You hand it over to an insurance company, and based on your age, your lifestyle, and where you live, they'll say, we will give you X pounds per month for the rest of your life. So it's kind of that reversal of a mortgage.
Interesting. But, back in the days of perhaps our parents, not so much in Asia, but I know in Europe and aging economies, people back then had a bigger pension pot, didn't they? Because they had lots of kids, and then by the time they were old, their next generation, there's still lots of people making an income and contributing it back to the government. Now with an aging population, and I think in Europe, I think France is the worst, but I'm not sure about the UK, but the size of families have shrunk. People just had one and a half kids. So actually, we are now, and I'm pointing at myself here, not you guys, when I get state pension, I'm thinking there's less money to share because there's an aging population. There's more old people and less young people.
Yeah, it's a really difficult one because you're absolutely right. I mean, there's a couple of factors which you've mentioned there. The first one is the fact that everyone is now typically living longer. So if you wind the clock back a few generations, retirement could be 10, 15 years, unfortunately, for a lot of people by the time they actually hung their coats up, so to speak. So, you were only having to plan, if you were planning, or, your final salary scheme or your state pension was only having to last quite a short period of time. Very suddenly, in relative terms, people have started to live a lot longer, whereas a lot of these schemes, state pension is now extremely expensive for us as a country or any other country that offers anything similar for the government to operate and run, which is why we've seen the state pension age get further and further extended.
So it's 67 nowadays.
67, it will be going up to 68, and by the time that most people will be retiring in their sort of 30s, 40s, it'll probably be up close to 70 if, there are very dangerous rumours that there might not even be a state pension as we know it moving forward. Now that's again really big contentious discussion, and I think any government that sort of waves that flag will be very, very brave indeed. But at the end of the day, people have got to look at things from a cost basis. So that's why you don't typically see, and as Simon said, your final salary schemes or defined benefit schemes, whatever you want to call them, are very, very rare these days, and that is the reason why they're, so to speak, worth their weight in gold. And for 99% of people, they should be maintaining those schemes. You hear in the news about a lot of people that have transferred away from that secure environment to a more flexible one, which on paper may seem attractive, but that then, with people living longer, means that you've got to actually be really, really responsible with your pot. And there are a lot of people and advisors that have got themselves into trouble for moving schemes where it wasn't the right thing for clients to do at all.
Interesting. We'll talk more with common mistakes we make when we're doing our post-retirement planning. We'll work with Unividual after this.
Across Bath, Chippenham and Melksham, this is Radio Bath.
That was Tears for Fears, and we are still with Unividual Chartered Financial Planners, Simon Jones and Greg Harris in the studio talking about post-retirement planning. So what are some of the common mistakes you find, Simon, when people try to plan their retirement?
So I think one of the things that comes up most frequently is, so we've touched upon a guaranteed income, but the yin to the yang of that is you can then have what's called a defined contribution or money purchase pension. So almost like a savings pot that you've put into throughout your working life, but it's just in a very attractive pension tax wrapper. A lot of people act under the misconception that when you reach retirement, you have to take, there's a 25% tax-free element. And a lot of people assume, well, I've got to take that all out straight away as soon as I retire. And often they take it out of an invested environment, and then it just sits in cash. So one of the conversations we have quite frequently is that 25%, it can be 25% of any amount you take. So if you just say, well, I only want 5,000 of my tax-free cash, you crystallize 20, and then you take that 5,000 out. So that's, and also you can then use that tax-free cash very cleverly with some good planning to actually derive the most tax-efficient income throughout your retirement. So I'd say that's probably number one. What would you say?
Yeah, I think just on top of that, there's the addition of, Simon's mentioned, if it sits in cash, which is one thing. But a lot of us, when we retire, we'll probably want to spend a bit of money on a nice holiday, treating some family, maybe even a nice new car, something like that, just to mark the occasion. So keeping it in cash is one thing. Spending it on something, I'm going to use the word irresponsible, but potentially that's a little bit harsh, but something that's not necessary can often be the way. If people have got a lot of money sat in cash, it normally gets spent. We are a population of spenders in the UK. So I think that's the only bit I'd add on to the tax-free cash element. And then again, people that regularly listen to us will think I'm a bit of a broken record, but it's not planning and not looking a bit further forward. I know that's something that we say a lot, but that's really very much by our name and definition. We are planners, and we need to instill that in our clients to plan and look a little bit further forward than, right, okay, I've got a nice shiny lump sum here. How do I spend it, and how do I once it's gone, really, isn't it? So it's about how we use that, as Simon said, and we'll come on to really tax-efficient ways of using that income, and that lump sum alongside a more traditional income can be really, really beneficial to families.
Is it because people think that it'll take a long time to get the money out? I mean, when you say, I want to take that tax-free cash out, how long does it actually take to take it out?
Again, that's a really good question. It can be a matter of weeks, but again, structured properly and depends on the investments. Without going too technical, most pensions that are invested will have an element of liquidity.
Yes.
And most pension schemes are fairly liquid. You're talking probably between 92-95% what we call immediate liquidity. So that's again within that few-week window. But what we also see on the converse argument of that is a lot of pensions will have what's called lifestyling impacted on them, which means that they will be pushed into lower, or what deemed to be lower risk assets the closer an individual gets to retirement.
Yes.
Now, not that they are low risk, and we've seen that certainly over the last 2 years, but some of those assets are bonds, but importantly, commercial property funds can often be one. And commercial property and property as a whole is notoriously illiquid, so very difficult to get money out. So if your pension is in that kind of environment, it can be quite difficult, and actually can be, well, we've had some examples, extreme examples, bear in mind, where commercial property funds have been frozen for years. at which point you can't get your money in, can't get money out. So it can be difficult, but traditionally there's normally a liquidity of around 90-95% as a bit of a benchmark. So you can get most of it pretty quickly. But I think the reason is why people decide to take it is, as Simon said, it's about, the misconception of people think they have to take it when they don't.
Yeah, you can take what you need as long as you plan a couple of weeks ahead and allow that time. Yeah. Any other thoughts, Simon?
I think I'll pick up on something that Greg said a moment ago about irresponsible. A few years ago, the pension freedoms came out, which now gives individuals the ability to take their whole pension in one go if they want to. And there are a lot of stories in the press about people taking their entire pension to buy a Lamborghini or stuff like that. But what a lot of people don't appreciate is if you take that whole pot in 1 year, it is taxed. Well, the 75% that isn't tax-free is taxed as income in the year you take it. So you're going to get a pretty hefty tax bill if that's what you do. And also the primary purpose of a pension is to provide you with income in retirement, not to buy that Lamborghini. That you want at age 55.
I think it's also the psychological thing. It's like, I've hidden this money away for 30 years, for instance, in your pension, or however many years you decide to put in a pension. And it's kind of like this emotion, like, I can't eat chocolate for 30 years. I'm going to go eat the whole cabinet of chocolate now. You know what I mean? It's like that. It's an emotional rush. So I think a lot of financial planning is also emotional management, emotion management. I always like, as you know, I think I mentioned in the last show, I said, I like hiding my money away. So when I did take out an income from my business and put it in my private pension, it actually was a kind of a happy time. It's like, and I texted my my financial planner and I said, I'm going to hide this money before Christmas shopping starts because it is one of those things. If you don't see it, you don't spend it.
Yeah.
So I think it's a lot of management of your own emotional thing. Do you also think? I mean, this is a personal opinion. Okay. Do you think the government should put a limit to how much you can take out?
That's so almost
year?
like a responsibility
Yeah.
sort of camp. That's again something that probably should on paper exist but doesn't, and I think it would be almost impossible to manage. And again, we're not coming at it from a point of view of, look, if someone's worked ridiculously hard for themselves and their family for X number of decades, that they shouldn't reward themselves, they shouldn't go on that big holiday. And actually we are very much in favour of that. But again, it goes back down to that word responsible. So I think everyone's different, everyone's unique, every family's going to have a different set of circumstances, and it's about having either someone internally within the family to bounce those ideas off of, or a financial planner. It's about having that person where you can soundboard, right, okay, if I do this, what's the consequence? And I think that while people have still got, as Simon said, the pension freedoms to be able to do that, there shouldn't be the necessity for that kind of provision that you just mentioned.
But I think self-awareness is important. And I'll close off the segment with a little story. This was early 2000s when I was managing a service team. One of our service technicians, great guy when he's working, but he knows he has an alcohol tendency, let's just say. And he knows himself enough that he told us that his wife will be managing the salary. So we transfer it to her account. And she has told us that she's happy receiving his monthly salaries in 2 installments. It will be paid every 2 weeks in halves, just because she knows that when she receives it in full, it will be spent in a week.
Yeah.
She just knows it. So the husband and wife became a really good team, and they allowed us to cut their salary payments in half because they know what they do when they see a lot of money in their bank account, and it goes into alcohol straight. So as he's working on his alcohol addiction, he's also being very aware, and like you said, looping someone in to help manage that. And we did that for forever, really, as long as he worked with us. That was the way we paid him, and they were quite happy with that.
I mean, so like you said, it's an extreme example, but it's one that really highlights that point, doesn't it? Of having that ability to be responsible with capital. I mean, it's a lot of money. I mean, apart from sort of financial liability of a mortgage or something like that, it's probably the biggest sort of financial decision that people can make when they choose to retire and what manner they choose to retire. And again, I'm not saying that to worry people. It should be a really exciting time.
Oh, definitely.
But it's one which you really do need that, for want of a better phrase, that confidant of someone that you can trust to do a good job for you, even if that is someone that's not necessarily professional, but internally in the family, spouse, sibling, someone like that, but just someone that knows and understands.
I think there was a study about people who win lotteries and how long, I can't remember what it was, but it was an amazingly short period of time where they either lose all their winnings or lose more of their personal money because they're not used to handling so much money. Let's say you win £1 million or something, and you just, after tax and everything, that's whatever 100,000. But then you just do stupid things with it, and sometimes you include your own personal savings with it because you're so confident that money is going to be well invested, and that's where you lose it. Yeah. So we'll be back with more common mistakes after this with individual chartered financial planners. That was Mud. Lonely this Christmas? We are thinking about you in Radio Bath. But also, sometimes being lonely and being by yourself is a great time to do some planning. Because, when you're people around you, what a great segue that was, right? I love it.
That's really
anyway, I am the segue queen.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we're still talking about common mistakes. Common mistakes. Back to that serious topic about money.
Yeah, so you touched upon it earlier, actually, the state pension. I think one of the most common mistakes is an assumption that the state pension will be enough. But when I talk to people and tell them that currently, if you've got full entitlement, it's £175 a week. So if you sat there and thought, £175 a week is gonna
that includes your rent or whatever mortgage that you still have left.
So without straying into what we spoke about 2 weeks ago, it is all about planning, knowing that when you come to post-retirement, you cannot just rely on that state pension.
Well, it's funny, when we talked about what's your lifestyle going to be when you're retired, people give us an abundant view of life. I want abundance in my retirement. But state pension is just going to give you enough. So if you want an abundant lifestyle, you need an abundant amount of cash, not an enough amount of cash. So it's very interesting when you say that it is just enough. Yes, you will have enough in your retirement age, but just enough.
Yeah. And we often have the conversation with clients about, we segment it out into two areas, really. What do you need to be able to retire? And that, again, is where things like the state pension or final salary schemes become really worth their weight in gold, because that gives you that bedrock of, right, I've got my enough capital there, or I've got what I need. But then no one really wants to retire on what they need. They want to be able to enjoy it, and therefore it's a conversation on what you want in retirement, and that's a very separate conversation, and often sort of split out into two areas, really. So, yeah, it's a difficult conversation sometimes, but it's so important, and you can just see when you're having the conversations with people the weight that's physically almost lifted off their shoulders is absolutely huge, and it's one of the more rewarding parts of the job, definitely, when we can put a proposal in front of a family or an individual and say, actually, you can retire on that lifestyle that you want, and provided we're sensible and we keep keep to it, we'll be okay.
I think coming back to your original point about does the planning ever end, I think one of the things we find quite frequently, and Greg would probably agree, is that the pattern of spending changes quite a lot in retirement. If you think about your early years of retirement, let's say they say you retire at 60, you're active, you're going to want to travel, expenditure might be slightly higher there. Then as you maybe less mobile, there's a reduction, but then there's almost an inverse curve, because then we'll touch upon it, but care maybe becomes a consideration, and then costs go up. So it's not just a linear, expenditure through those sort of, let's say, 25 to 30 years of retirement. It is ever changing.
Absolutely. I think also when you first retire, you're like, I'm free, and then you're like, oh, I want to do this, I want to do that. And then suddenly, like, I'm really bored of golf and yachts. And I just want to stay at home and read a book. How much is a book? $9.99. That's all you're really going to spend, right? I think it's that emotional shock. And then when you reward yourself enough, you just kind of feel bored of it. It becomes your lifestyle. It's like, what business can I start? I'm 67. What business can I start now? I mean, that's...
Oh, you're one of those.
I think so. I think some people, have this thing. We had this lady during lockdown. She joined me, not in the studio, obviously, over the phone. But she was a management consultant that retired probably, 55 years old. Then she bought a plot of land, and she started a flower farm. And now she is doing the flower business. And she's 60 something, maybe close to 70. And we talked about redefining retirement because ultimately, after all the golfs and the afternoon teas and all the yacht and cruises, you're back to like, how can I live in a meaningful way? You know?
And we touched on that last time, I think, a little bit, didn't we? About, you know, a lot of people now, especially that are running their businesses or senior within business, which often people get to by the time they're looking to retire, is you end up with this sort of phased retirement where people might go down to sort of 3, 2, maybe even 1 day a week in some circumstances, and it's not this sort of clean cut of, right, I've hit this age, therefore I need to retire or I want to retire, which again goes back down to a lot of the conversations we've had today and our previous session. But phased retirement can actually mean another thing, which I think would be really interesting to sort of have a chat about, which is obviously how you then use not only the tax-free cash that we've mentioned, but also then how you sort of phase that income requirement to match what you need at those various points that Simon and yourself have just mentioned, at you know, those intervals at retirement where things change ever so slightly.
Ooh, I want to catch that in the next segment. Yeah, we'll talk more about that in the next segment, so keep listening. We'll be back with more after this.
Across Bath, Westbury and Warminster, this is Radio Bath.
You left us in a bit of suspense there, Greg.
Sorry.
Phase out retirement.
Yeah. So
What
look,
does that mean?
For your listeners, I will apologise in advance for a slightly more technical element of retirement, but it's one that used correctly is massively advantageous to individuals and families, and it ties into a lot of what Simon's already mentioned about how you use different parts of your pension, i.e. the tax-free part and the taxable part, in conjunction with each other. And effectively, as Simon said, you don't need to take all your tax-free cash from day one when you do decide to retire. So what you can choose to do is you use that over the course of your retirement to bring down, because it's still tax-free, bring overall tax bill on the income that you take out of your pension. Now, the benefits to that, and I've given that extremely high level, but the benefits of that are twofold. One, if you're having to allocate for less tax being taken, because it's still taxed in the same way that we would traditionally be taxed when we earn a normal income through PAYE, effectively, if you're allocating less tax, you don't have to take as much from your pension, which means then you take less, leaves more in, longer for it to grow potentially over the longer term, and therefore it's from a sustainability point of view, it lasts a lot longer, which then ties into all the other benefits from a legacy planning point of view, future income, having a greater flexibility when you might hit a big birthday in your 70s or 80s, or, you know, maybe less fun things like care. You've got that sort of sustained pot for a longer period of time, which means that when things do change, as they will, as Simon said, that you've got that ability to be able to respond and maneuver around those different areas.
That's cool. And the nice thing I like about you being so conceptual and big picture, I find the best thing for me to do is, yes, listening to these shows are important. It's just to go to someone like Unividual, bring my personal portfolio, and just say, how do I maximize this? Talk to me about my numbers instead of this conceptual thing about what's taxable. But the whole concept is, if you don't take it all out at once, you leave some behind to create passive income for yourself. You let it grow by yourself. And I don't know how many of you have been investing during the lockdown, but I'm happy to say that if you have invested in some of the newer portfolios like sustainability, tech, medical, and everything, you would have seen at least a 14%, 15% growth over the last year, at least. You know, and I'm not talking about cryptocurrencies and weird things like that. I'm talking
You'll start
about
giving me the shakes if you do.
actual things. Actual things. You don't have to get all sexy about investment. You just have to talk to the right people. But I think, I mean, you guys, would that work if people came to you with their actual numbers and you actually can tell them what that means for them? How to phase out their retirement?
Absolutely. Again, part of our name is built from unique and individual, and we very much carry that into, you know, when we deal with clients. And I'm sure someone would agree that he treats, and we all do treat every individual, or every family probably is a better way of, you know, saying it, as a standalone basis. You know, yes, we might have dealt with hundreds of clients that have had similar circumstances, want to retire at a similar age, have a similar level of capital available. That does not mean in any sense of the word that they want the same outcome from that advice, and that's something that we take very, very seriously.
I think also you touched on a really interesting point about looking at the whole portfolio. By its very nature, when you talk about retirement, pensions is probably front and centre. but you can derive an income in your retirement from a multitude of sources. So Greg's already talked about people who maybe run their own businesses and they slowly take that step backwards. Part of their income comes from that business. Also, bear in mind other sort of tax wrappers, and I try not to get too jargony, but you have an ISA sitting there. A lot of people just assume, oh, that's just a cash ISA. That's not getting a good return. You can also hold investments in a stocks and shares ISA. So then you've got another pot, if you like, that doesn't have any tax consequence when you draw upon it. Property is another area, very popular in this country, not without its risks in terms of,
liquidity,
Yeah.
capital gain,
tax,
or lack thereof.
Yeah, exactly. You can't just sell a window or a brick if you need to release a little bit of money out of your.
Never
rental
tried that. I
portfolio.
might actually do that. Would
Well,
you
could
just like
try.
to buy my window? You can rent your window, though. Here, put your advertisement on my window.
Now you're thinking outside the box. But yeah, and that's part of the whole thing, is to look at the whole bigger picture and say, right, okay, you've got all these different sources of income, right? Let's create a plan that derives the income in the most sensible, tax efficient way that's going to make sure it lasts as long as you need it to.
What changed for me when I was younger, my main thing is property. Okay, so listeners, you can create wealth by 3 different kinds of investments in your portfolio: property, stocks and shares, business. Ultimately, business is something that you can control most, because depending on how you run the business, your profits go up and down, your cash will go up and down. That is an investment vehicle you can control most. Stocks and shares, unless you are a board member of some sort, most of these stocks and shares you're investing as other people's company. They're probably very huge, and they're a mix of companies. If you know your risk profile, you'll choose a certain portfolio, but most of the time, this is something that you cannot control. However, it is much more liquid than perhaps a property investment, okay, depending again on the markets that you're playing in. But stocks and shares are nice, and property is a third investment vehicle. Property is typically less liquid, but some people do really well in it and also you need to understand what game you play best and what kind of property. Some people go into commercial property. I personally do rental apartments because rental apartments is things I understand. But then again, I also do locations that I understand, because investing in Bath versus Birmingham or Scotland or everything will be very different, and you need to acquaint yourself with it. So these 3 vehicles. What changed for me was that when I was younger, it was okay for me to be illiquid because I had time, right? Yeah. But I've recently moved out as much as I can without selling in a desperate situation. I've tried to liquidate my property investments to put it more into stocks and shares and also businesses, because 1, I want more control. Secondly, stocks and shares are just generally more liquid. And then if you get growth on a certain year, you can actually cash it out without having to wait 5 to 7 years or 10 years in some property cycles. It does take all that time to get capital gain. So I think when you bring your personal portfolio to individual and when you meet them and get personal advice, I think one of the questions you need to be asking is, do I have the right ratio of liquidity? Because depending on how old you are, and it doesn't have to be about age, some of us have illnesses and everything like that. So depending on what you need right now, you might not want, seemingly attractive investments that actually is very low on liquidity. Yep. It might actually scare you to have those kinds of things.
Yeah, and again, sound like a broken record and won't apologise for it, but it's about that planning and understanding what you need. And, when people come to us, we don't necessarily need them to, have all the answers to the questions that we ask them. And sometimes just probing with those questions gets people to think about things in a slightly different way, as you've said. And, different asset classes will work in different ways. They'll have different liquidity, but that will also change. We've seen huge buoyancy in the sort of residential property market with houses not really even hitting marketing standards. They're just, they've got estate agents now got lists of people that they can call for different properties, which is really good. But what that causes is, and with all those assets that you've just mentioned, there's a huge driver between sort of consumer confidence and consumer sort of valuation in those assets. Certain businesses underperform because potentially they fall out of favour with consumers and their customers. Property, certain areas may have bit of bad press, or if they're built by a certain company, they might, fall slightly under valuation, or converse the opposite. So lots of different parts impact on this. It's not an exact science. It can't ever be, but it's one, and I think the key word I take away from that is a proactive response to those different changing climates is really important. Again, it goes back down to having that personal or team of people to be able to say, am I doing this the right way? And that's really key to a lot of people, because money, when we've got it, fine, no worries, but when we haven't got it, or we're a little bit worried about it, that can really tie into the rest of our mental health and stress and anxiety and those sorts of things, which can impact every aspect of our life.
And as you said in your very first show with us, when Sherry was here as well, the way you act around money will be transferred to your children.
Absolutely.
So if you're anxious about money because you don't have the right financial advice, and you're carrying that anxiety around the house, then you're teaching your kids that, guys, money is something you need to be anxious about. Let's worry about that all your life. Not a very good thing. So I also would add to that, when you get advice about financial investments from your friends, just remember that they have different investing habits and they have different investing personalities. Investing personalities, I find, is very important, because I was drawn into all these commercial property investments because a trusted mentor of mine did it. But I realized that wasn't my personality. My personality was smaller units, lots of them, but smaller, like individual rentals. Don't want to deal with company rentals.
Yeah.
It looks sexy for somebody else, but it's not for me. But you need to understand your investing personality. And that's why you need individual consultations, and that's why you guys are individual. That's fantastic. Let's wrap up, and we'll be back with Simon and Greg after this.
Locally made. This is Radio Bath.
We've had a very interesting segment, guys. I think you've given a lot of good retirement tips. How do we wrap up from this? What are some of the final advice you can give us?
So I think some of the things that we've touched on today is it's key to understand your options. So we've talked about the guaranteed versus the flexible, and how the state pension sits within your planning. I think it's really important not to be afraid to ask what you might think is a silly question, but there's no such thing as a silly question. And get advice, as Greg said, whether that be from a family member, a trusted confidant, or a professional financial planner. Seek it out and follow it, I guess.
Fantastic. Greg, what about you?
I think I'm going to go a slightly different route and go more practical sort of takeaway from this. I think we've touched upon the state pension, which I think can be quite daunting to some people about how much they are or aren't going to get. You can actually find that out really, really easily by going onto the government website, and there's an element on there called the Government Gateway, which you go on and it'll basically, you put in your national insurance number, a little bit of personal detail, and you'll find out very quickly what you're on track for. And I think that's
yes,
a
they
really
will
good
give
starting.
you an amount.
Correct.
They'll have an automated calculator based on your profile.
Based on your profile, and basically, without going to the technical, state pensions all based on national insurance contributions. And if you've mothered children and you've had time off work for that, then they will also give you credits for that as well. So find out if it doesn't look right, give them a call, ask the question, and like someone said, there's no such thing as a silly question in this industry.
Fantastic. How do we get in touch with you guys?
Our main office number is 0330 353 0150. Give us a call. One of the team will answer, and they'll put you on to someone who's local to you, or specialise in the areas that you might be wanting to have a look at. Obviously, got a number of advisors that work now. Soon, hopefully, potentially one in Edinburgh as well. So we're really stretching far and wide. Bath, Bristol, London, and soon to be Edinburgh.
Fantastic. Thank you, guys. As always, great to have you on the show, and you'll be back in January, right?
See you soon. Happy New Year.
Looking forward to it. Thanks for having us.